Welcome to Ryan Runs, everybody. Welcome to Patreon, actually. This is Ryan Runs 15. I am Ryan Miller, but this is also the introduction video to the newly launched Patreon for Ryan Runs. And I think if I'm going to ask for support, you deserve the details. And I have gone into some detail on the Patreon page itself. Please read what I wrote there. It is from the heart. And if by the end of it you think, so what? Then hey, you saved yourself some time on this video and we both have our answer. If not, stay for the long haul, because I'm going way back to college, to the University of Utah, where I walked away with a degree in film studies, history, and a minor in psychology, and a desire to get a master's degree. But after getting back into California and applying at UCLA, I received a rejection that said something along the lines of, here's a smaller program where you might be able to make some contacts that can then get you in to a college such as UCLA. And that's their prerogative. I mean, nepotism isn't rare or confined to academia, but I think it turned me off to the point where I got a full-time job, a 9-to-5er, as a videographer, as an editor, and kind of kicked around for a few years, and maybe even had an early midlife crisis of sorts, unless I end up dying at 60-ish, in which case it came at the perfect time. And didn't know what I wanted to do, even though I was already doing something. But also had a kid at that point, had a family, and knew that all of these lofty ideas of writing or even something related to video games weren't really viable anymore. So it was kind of a dark place, I'll admit, for however long, until I took on a second job. A job managing apartments on weekends and nights. So I thought it would afford us the opportunity to at least make a lot of money and buy a house. Again, we're talking about California, so who knows? But what ended up happening instead was that same week, I got laid off of the full-time job, and essentially Freelance Ryan was born. And that's where I've been for 11, 12, 13 years, something like that. I feel lucky because before I lost that job, maybe even just a month before, I thought to myself, I should probably have some of my own equipment in case I want to make some of my own things. Again, this was probably born out of that dark place or midlife crisis where I wanted something to be mine, or at least my career to be mine in a way that I didn't feel like it was. So I had a Canon T2i that I purchased, because this was also at the time where the DSLR explosion was kind of happening. Videographers had figured out they didn't need to spend a lot of money on camcorders and could even get better results on DSLRs with interchangeable lenses and whatnot. So I did that thing. I had that thing and started doing jobs for whatever clients would have me. And while that didn't bring in a lot of money, or at least a lot more money, it did allow me some flexibility, along with the job managing apartments, which allowed me an amazing amount of flexibility because I got free rent out of the deal. And so we could absorb a lot of hits, but we couldn't save a lot of money. So we also didn't have things like insurance or 401ks, stuff that I guess people who think about retirement or the future tend to have. But I had that flexibility, and sooner or later I started to use it to create things that truly made me happy, or that I truly wanted to make, which maybe this is what happens to dreams, right? Maybe this is where they go when we get that 9-to-5 job. They become that hobby that keeps us sane. They become that passion project. And that's probably what happened to me. I don't know if I'm going to be able to verbalize half the stuff in my head right now, so just stick with me for a bit. And again, this is all emblematic of Ryan Runs, so hey, there's no wrong answer, or it's all wrong, and that's what I'm asking you to support. So I met a fellow by the name of Matt Amberg. We created one of these passion projects ourselves in 0 Hit Points and talked about video games. It was a podcast. It was also some videos here and there, and eventually had something to do with movies. And while 0 Hit Points didn't survive for reasons we might obliquely talk about, Book Club for Movies has, and was birthed from that, from our love of movies and talking about them, and continues to this day, but is separate from Ryan Runs. But the reason I mention that is because Zero Hit Points was around for years. And not that we didn't work hard or even do our best or put endless amounts of ourselves into that thing, but all of the pieces didn't come together or weren't arranged, or we just weren't ready. I wasn't ready. And maybe that's the hardest thing to verbalize, because you don't know in the moment, and oftentimes you need somebody to tell you. And I will be honest that all of this, all of what you're seeing, this Patreon, the newish book club for movies, is partly because of my wife and her efforts to snap me out, or at least push me forward where I sometimes didn't admit or didn't know that I needed to. And I'll be honest, I'm still trying to figure that out. And that is going to be Ryan Runs. This is early on in Ryan Runs. Some would say too early for a Patreon, but that's why this video is here. You're getting it all, and you may be starting at the beginning, but you'll be part of an evolution. So it's time to define what this is, what this part of me, this channel really is. And again, thank you to my wife for throwing some of that into some much needed relief by way of some very important, if not occasionally loud, conversations. But also thank you to the most recent 9-to-5 job that I took about a year before COVID, because by the time I had made that many more things for another marketing machine, I had been furloughed when COVID hit and then laid off about a year after that, maybe-ish. And what I learned was that finally, yes, of course, maybe even, I would rather be the reason somebody unwinds at the end of the day. I would rather be that thing that makes somebody smile or laugh or even learn than make some more things for another marketing machine. I probably still will. Again, Freelance Ryan is at it again nowadays. But this is it. And I am here. And this is Ryan Runs. And practically speaking, I think I've landed on kind of 3 pillars for the site. One is the podcast, essentially this thing. And that, yes, has been largely games, but also I experimented a little bit last week with just some memories and whatnot. And to that end, some of the Patreon goals and maybe even perks have to do with other subjects that will come into this show, that will come into Ryan Runs, the weekly podcast. But also, recently you've seen me try my hand at more scripted content. And I know it probably doesn't seem scripted because it takes place in the same area and it's kind of still me going on and on to camera. But I'm talking about Chasers, by the way. Series like Chasers take hours and hours of research and, yes, writing. And yes, that does take the form of bullet points that I do try to turn into conversational dialogue in front of a camera. But they are much more scripted pieces than what you would get on a weekly podcast. So that's kind of pillar number 2. Pillar number 3, I think, is gaming related in some way. I have in my head maybe Let's Plays or live streaming, and there might be some crossover with Let's Plays when it comes to scripted content because, again, those are edited after the fact. But live streaming is very much something that you can, I feel like, put out. And it will also still have some sort of hook to it. You know, I'm sure I won't be playing any normal or currently popular game as it usually goes. But that's the third-ish pillar that I'm thinking of. And some examples of those will be forthcoming. I know right now all you're going to have, especially for early Patreon members, is these Ryan Runs weekly episodes, which themselves have evolved from the first episode quite a bit. So... and then you have Chasers, which is an early example of what a series done by me would look like. So I hope soon to have also examples of some game streaming and or some Let's Plays up. So stay tuned for those. I will even say that one of the Let's Plays I have in mind is not a video game at all. It is a real life thing because I want to bring my family in for some of this stuff. some of it not against their will. So those are kind of the three pillars I see for Ryan Runs at this point. The weekly podcast, the scripted series, and the gameplay or let's play or game stream, whatever it might be. I think I can do about 1.5 of those a week at this point. I want to say 2, but on the weeks where, let's say, I'm staring intently at a Patreon until it's perfect, I might only get one other thing done. So let's say 1.5 things for now. And that's about what you can expect from Ryan Runs on a weekly basis at this point. But that's exactly what changes. The better this does, the more it can be all that I do. And you will see some of that in the tiers that I have set up. So just to go through those real quick, at the $2 a month tier, you will get the Patreon feed, which I will use for kind of bonus audio, video, behind the scenes stuff, and access to the Discord server. So come and chat. Next up at $4, you will get all of that, plus some podcast chat outs. I will say your name on the Ryan Runs show, and it'll be great. After that, $9 a month, you will get access to all of that stuff, and your name will show up as a producer in the video credits. I know you haven't seen any credits on any of the videos I've done so far. That's because it has been only me, with the exception of the Chasers video where I believe Evelyn, my daughter, has been on the camera. So I probably should have included her name in the credits there, but I will include your name in the credits first before my daughter. Next up, at $24 a month, you're going to get a personalized video message from me. It will probably look a lot like this, but will be additionally awkward in some way, I promise. The next up, for $48 a month, you're going to get all of that, and also you get to send me a recorded message of whatever you want to play on the show itself, on the Ryan Runs episode of your choosing, where it can become a topic of discussion, probably amongst myself. But if it happens to be a week where I have somebody else on the podcast with me, then hey, it's their fault. Lastly, at $96 a month, you are going to get me. If you were to hire me off the street, that's about my going rate. You're getting a little bit of a discount, but hey, you're also getting everything else from before. And you can use this hour with me to ask me about anything. We can consult about videos, about podcasts, about video games, skateboarding. I don't care. I'm yours. So those are the tiers, and they will evolve much like everything else around here. I know I've said it before. I don't know how many times, depending on what the edit ends up being, but it's early on. So I know a subscription is partly a vote of confidence, if not a leap of faith. And this is Ryan Runs. This is my family, and they all have different names. This is Evelyn, this is Gray, and that's my wife, Candy. So in the cheesiest way possible, come be a part of the family.